Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power Meteor build guide. I'm Zik, and in this video I'll show you how to delete everything in Diablo with giant magical flaming rocks. I've been working on this build all season, and it actually started as a lightning summoner build, but has evolved many times into something else entirely. Now the main thing we are summoning are gigantic rank 12 meteors from the sky. Like a lot of my builds, this is a high risk, high reward playstyle built around satisfaction. We are min-maxing to be as powerful as possible, but not at the expense of fun. At its core, it's a fire build with a lightning base, built around fast attack speed, high mobility, and massive crushing meteor damage. This build leans directly into the recent changes made in the 1.1.1 patch, taking advantage of the 160% increased crit damage on meteor, buffed Searing Heat legendary node, buffed Essu's ferocity, buffed serpentine aspect, the new damage reduction heart, as well as several other minor changes. I can now easily punch around 20 to 25 levels above me in nightmare dungeons with very quick clear speed, and I'm doing all this with just over 6,000 health and without the Searing Heat legendary node yet. With better gear, more skill, and more levels, it could definitely go higher. I certainly have the damage to clear 30 plus levels above me, but this is the range where I start to get one shot. Better gear with more max health rolls and damage reduction will help a lot. I think my favorite thing about this build is how fast-paced and skillful it feels, where if I was a professional League player who could attack move quicker and sidestep better, this build would be even more powerful. With Essu's proc, which is basically all the time, our attack speed is high enough that even with the staff, my old fingers can't keep up, but I very much like to try. Also, every 70 seconds you'll be able to turn into a literal lightning god, making it even faster. With the resets this is giving us on our double teleport, the amount you can blink around and leverage the Raymond stun feels amazing. Now this is very much an endgame build focused on maxing out multipliers for the damage equation to give us this multi-million meteor burst window. So we won't be covering much of leveling or progression, although I will say that I've leveled all the way through Season 1 testing different variations of this build and had quite a good time doing it, so it's definitely possible. Also, I have a slightly more offensive version where we basically drop our 2 defensive hearts to run Talrasha, Pakana, and Aspect of Shattered Stars, which I think is actually a bit more fun but not quite as viable for pushing higher tier Nightmare dungeons. I'll cover the swap in the gear section. I really do love making new builds, but I'm trying to condense the videos down a bit to be shorter without losing any of the vital information so that I can try to create more of them. So I'd really appreciate your feedback on how that feels for this video in the comments. Also, I'll be streaming a bit more casually for now as I try to ramp up my video production to include more build guides as well as other games where we can still wield magic, such as Baldur's Gate 3, but you will occasionally find me live on Twitch at Zikorik with a 0 if you want to hang out or ask me any questions. And a really big shout out to the homies who have been hanging out as I tested this build and try to get the stream off the ground. Alright, let's dive in. We'll be starting out with the combat strategy, followed by skills, Paragon Board, Glyphs, gear, aspects, and seasonal hearts. You can find timestamps to all these sections for easy navigation, but I promise there is a method to my madness, so I do recommend watching from start to finish for best results. This build very much reminds me of Palm Pyro Arcane Mage in World of Warcraft, where we're pretty powerful all the time, we have a huge burst window when we choose to dump our mana, and we're leveraging all of our defensives and utility to enable a more powerful offense. Additionally, all of this is amplified once per minute when we get to rip our lightning ult cooldown. My best advice for successful combat in this build is to stay on the offensive. The more you are attacking, the more often your teleport will be up, which enables you to clump everything together and stun it with Raiment of the Infinite, and this is the best way to set up our massive meteor burst window. The more timid you play, the more opportunity things will have to attack you, and with little focus on defensives, you can quickly get overwhelmed. So the main thing you're going to want to do when engaging enemies with this build is teleport right into the middle of all of them. We're running teleport both as an enchantment to replace our dodge as well as a separate ability on the hotbar, allowing us to teleport in with our dodge while still having a CC break teleport on our hotbar to get out if we need to. Alright, so starting out the combat strategy, the very first thing we want to do right before teleporting in is summon our 2 Hydras. This will give a constant and reliable 12% damage multiplier from the Conjuration Mastery passive, start burning enemies to activate Devouring Blaze, and give us 2 quick chances at automatically casting Frozen Orb, which is what we are running as our second enchantment. This gives us automatic cold damage to fully stack our Elementalist Glyph, free damage to supplement our burst window, and a 30% chance at vulnerability with each explosion. The AoE chill effect will also activate crowd control and slow enemy movement. Our only other way to enable vulnerability with this build is with Frost Nova, which brings us to the Mega Meteor Burst window. We really want to save our Nova to give us guaranteed vulnerability when we drop all of our meteors. So once you teleport in and everything is stunned, before ripping your Nova, you'll want to call down a single meteor. This meteor will have a 160% increased crit damage multiplier from Aspect of 3 Curses because everything is healthy, a 12% multiplier from our Hydras with Conjuration Mastery, a 9% multiplier from Elemental Dominance, with an additional 20% multiplier from the Control Glyph since everything is stunned by Raiment. While this meteor is falling, you can cast Frost Nova right as the stun ends and right before this meteor impacts. This activates another 18% multiplier from Hoarfrost and triggers instant vulnerability. Summoning the meteor first and then popping Nova right before it hits will maximize our 4-second freeze and vulnerability window to smash everything around us with as many meteors as possible. Subsequent meteors will have pretty much all the same multipliers with an additional 30% crit multiplier from Devouring Blaze since the first meteor burns and immobilizes, and will also begin to stack the 3 additional multipliers from the Elementalist, Exploit, and Destruction Glyph. Aspect of 3 Curses will actually remain at 160% even after the first meteor because we are running Barber, so they are usually immune until they explode and so technically still healthy. Once you freeze everything with Nova, you'll want to spam the shit out of Meteor until you run out of mana. You'll be getting some mana back from Umbral with the Immobilize on Meteor, allowing you to drop 4 to 5 together very quickly, with extra auto-casted meteors falling 30% of the time when hitting 3 or more enemies from the Enhanced Meteor upgrade. As soon as you're out of mana, you'll want to get the fuck out of there. You can use your second teleport or simply kite backwards to get some space. As you're kiting, you're going to want to try to attack move as much as possible with Spark. Because we are running CDR boots, every attack we make will reduce the cooldown of our dodge teleport by about a second, and with Essus procced all the time, we will have very high attack speed to enable this reset. Spark is easy to hit and has a nice little cleave effect that actually gives us pretty solid damage for just being a basic attack. Once our dodge teleport is back up in a few seconds, we can use it to re-engage with another clump stun and drop a few more meteors. If you're under pressure, you'll really want to try to keep the actual teleport spell on your hotbar off cooldown. Sadly, the dodge teleport doesn't give us that split second of unstoppable to break CC, and I have no idea why, so you'll want to use this primarily as your offensive teleport to clump and stun everything, while saving your actual teleport as a CC break and escape tool. Once you get the hang of it, you can start kiting forward into more mobs instead of kiting backward, allowing you to lightning meteor smash at Mach speed, which I just looked up and is the speed of sound in any given medium, so still about 767 miles per hour in Sanctuary. So putting it all together, this is the play. First, summon your 2 Hydras. Then, dodge teleport in to clump and stun everything. Call down a single meteor, Frost Nova right before it hits, then spam the shit out of meteor on everything around you till you're out of mana. And finally, start to kite while attack moving with Spark until you can dodge teleport in again to reclump and stun everything while dropping more meteors. Repeat this cycle until everything is super dead. Also remember to keep your Hydras up to maintain your 12% multiplier, and you'll find that you get a lot of auto-casted orbs out of Hydra, and so if you have extra mana, you can actually use Hydra to fish for orb procs. Now the coolest part about this build is every 70 seconds, you'll be able to enhance this whole process by turning into a Lightning Ninja, amplifying your attack speed even more while summoning a bunch of free lightning spells. This, stacked with Essus and the affix on your gloves and helmet, will put you at about 100% increased attack speed. Also, every lightning spear that gets summoned will add an additional 6% to your Conjuration Mastery multiplier. During this window, as long as you're holding primary attack, you'll be getting an absolute shitload of extra lightning spells to autocast while resetting your dodge teleport every few seconds. This gives you the ability to actually stand your ground and leverage this insane attack speed without having to attack move. You can simply dodge teleport every few seconds to keep everything clumped, stunned, and confused as you decimate it. Now bosses actually seem to be pretty easy and straightforward with this build. Use basically the same strategy to dodge teleport on top of them and Nova crush them with meteors. Every time you dodge teleport, Nova, Meteor, or get an auto-casted frozen orb, the CC will increase the stagger bar, giving you the ability to stagger bosses very quickly. For bosses that you can't kill within a few seconds, try to save your lightning ult as well as build up your mana pool for right before they are about to get staggered, so you can blast them super quickly with Spark while dropping as many meteors as possible. Try to dodge everything you can with movement, and save your actual teleport in case you get caught. Also, try to keep your Hydras up the whole time, as they will keep your Devouring Blaze passive active on the boss, give you your Conjuration Mastery stacks, and actually do pretty solid DPS themselves to single targets. If you encounter a big asshole like the Butcher, find a pillar and simply run around it while your Hydras murder him. Alright, that's it for the combat strategy. Now let's take a closer look at our skills. Understanding what skills we are running and why will enable you to be more creative in combat and really adapt this build to be your own. I encourage you to try out different variations here if something feels off or if you have a new idea. Always remember that these are simply guides and not rulebooks, so look for creative ways to adapt stuff to fit the exact way you like to play. This is why I take the time to create this section. Alright, starting out, our first and primary ability is going to be Spark. Believe it or not, this is actually one of my favorite abilities in the game because I feel like it's the only ranged primary attack that can give consistent DPS. It gives you a really solid way to cleave enemies from a distance while regenerating mana, and when stacked with the lightning ult will give you tons of free auto-casted lightning spells. We are taking the Glinting Spark upgrade to further enable our crit damage. The only core skill we are running is Frozen Orb, which we are just using as an enchantment and so won't have it on our hotbar. Meteor is basically our core skill that we are using all of our mana on. We're taking the Greater Frozen Orb upgrade for the extra chance at vulnerability, as well as scooping 3 ranks of Elemental Dominance because this now affects Meteor. For our defensives, we have Frost Nova and Teleport. We are running Mystical Frost Nova for the guaranteed vulnerability, and because of how critical this vulnerability is to our burst window, we want it up as much as possible, which is why we need to prioritize +4 ranks of Frost Nova on our boots, which will get us to rank 5. We'll also be running just 1 point in Teleport while scooping the Shimmering Teleport upgrade. Unfortunately, it appears that extra ranks in Teleport don't decrease the cooldown of the Dodge Teleport, only the actual Teleport spell on our hotbar. Additionally, for some reason, our Dodge Teleport can't break CC, while our actual Teleport can. It does appear, however, that these Teleport upgrades do apply to the Dodge Teleport, so we will be getting a bit of extra CDR and damage reduction when we use it to teleport in. Most of the CDR on our Dodge Teleport is coming from the primary affix on our boots that gives us reduced cooldown on our dodge when we attack. With a high focus on attack speed, this gives us a very quick and reliable way to reset our Dodge Teleport. The other notable thing that Dodge Teleport does trigger is the Protection passive, which will give us a 30% max life barrier for 3 seconds, which was actually increased from 2 with this last patch. Like always, we're grabbing 1 point in Elemental Attunement to give our crits a chance to auto-reset our cooldowns. Because this can only trigger once every 10 seconds, further points invested into it are not as valuable and can be better utilized elsewhere. The same type of logic applies to align the elements. The max stack we can obtain is 40% regardless of how many points we sink into it, so just 1 point will give us the most value. This also received a nice buff with the last patch, allowing it to stack faster, making the single point strategy even more viable. We'll also be grabbing 3 points in Mana Shield for the extra damage reduction, which will kick in right after our Meteor burst window as our freeze from Nova is expiring to help us get out of there and start kiting backward. 3 points in Protection is also quite valuable with this build because of the extra survivability it gives every time we teleport. We'll also be grabbing Hydra here with a few ranks that will be supplemented by the ranks we get on our helmet, as well as the Summoned Hydra upgrade, which gives us the burn to activate Devouring Blaze. We'll also be running 3 ranks in the Conjuration Mastery passive, which will be boosted to 6 from the ranks in our amulet. This will give us a very reliable 12% damage multiplier that we can have up pretty much all the time, and will boost it by another 6% for every lightning spear that procs during unstable currents. With a bit of luck, it's possible to get this to 8 or more stacks when we rip our ult with Hydras up. For our mastery skills, we are grabbing our main damage pump, which is Meteor. Upgrading to Wizard's Meteor will give us a valuable immobilize for 2 seconds with every single meteor, and since anything standing where a meteor hit gets burned for 3 seconds, this allows our meteors to automatically trigger a fully stacked Devouring Blaze passive. Now we'll talk about this more in the gear section, but you'll really want to keep an eye out for an amulet that gives +2 ranks to mastery skills, which can be upgraded to +3, and either has the Conjuration Mastery or Devouring Blaze passive ranks on it as well. It's also very important to look for pants with a +3 meteor roll that can be upgraded to +4, and this will bring you to an absolutely massive rank 12 meteor that's going to be hitting for 168% of base weapon damage. At our ult tree, we are grabbing 3 ranks in Hoarfrost to give us another equation multiplier during our Frost Nova burst window, as well as 3 points into Fiery Surge for the extra mana regeneration when stuff dies to meteor. We'll also be grabbing Unstable Currents as our lightning ult to enable the massive attack speed window and auto-casted lightning spells we discussed in the combat section. Note that we don't need the final upgrade to this because we actually have no way to generate crackling energy in this build. I tried running a couple things like Static Discharge and the Spark upgrade to give us some crackling energy procs, but even with these upgrades, the damage just does not feel worth it without investing more resources into crackling energy, and so I think these points are better utilized elsewhere. Finally, for our key passive, we are grabbing Esu's Ferocity. This is actually such a sick key passive that I'm now in love with after using it for a while. And it just got even better with this last patch because crits against bosses now trigger the bonus effects as well as the attack speed from the Ancient Flame aspect. This makes bosses a breeze with this build because you will have these bonuses combined with the attack speed procced pretty much the entire fight. Alright, that's it for skills. Now let's take a quick look at our Paragon Board setup. We're not going to spend a ton of time here because my Paragon Board strategy hasn't changed much from my previous videos or builds. If you want to understand the logic of why we have it set up this way, I recommend checking out my previous Paragon Board analysis video. I assume many of you have actually seen that video or my previous Chain Shatter build, so you'll recognize most of this setup. The main thing that's changing is that we are using the Searing Heat crit board as our primary build board in the middle because we are running a fire crit based spec. This enables us to hit our crit and vulnerability damage bonuses sooner, frees up an additional spot for our 5th board, and actually gives us just enough points to hit a 6th glyph socket. We'll be doing our standard starting path up through the enchanter board, grabbing all our non-physical damage while optimizing this socket for deck scaling. I did want to mention real quick that I found this little pathing optimization to connect up this way instead of bridging it right here, which will save us a couple extra points. So if you're running this board for other builds from my previous videos, that's a nice little optimization you can make. Next, we're moving into the Searing Heat board to grab our 3rd socket optimized for decks, along with the extra crit and fire damage right in the middle of the board. Because it got buffed with this last patch to affect total crit chance, it could be worth grabbing the Searing Heat legendary node next, but I actually pathed down to the Frigid Fate board first in order to grab the additional socket and the 70% vuln damage increase from these 2 vulnerability clusters. We'll also be getting a little extra 1% damage reduction bonus on the Oppressive node from the changes in this last patch. After that, I actually grabbed this Keeper of Flames damage reduction cluster next, which also got a little 2% boost with the last patch, because my damage feels really solid at this point in the game, but we always need more survivability. Note that for all the clips shown in this video, I'm right here on the Paragon board, and so I've actually not grabbed the Searing Heat legendary node yet, or made my way over to these final 2 boards. Once we finally scoop this legendary node, we can path over to Burning Instinct as our 5th board. Here we are grabbing our 5th socket optimized for dexterity, as well as this extra bit of damage and damage reduction. Next, we'll make our way up for a bit more damage reduction and armor here, before heading down to our 6th and final board, which is Static Surge. We are mainly using this board for the socket, optimized for just 25 will, in order to bring this warding glyph bonus online, and the glyph bonus itself will give us a nice little boost to this stun damage from the Incapacitate rare node. So that's it for Paragon board pathing. Now let's talk about glyphs. It's really important to understand that our final glyph setup is going to be quite a bit different than the order in which we are leveling and socketing our glyphs. In the final setup, we are placing our glyphs to optimize the scaling available from the attributes around each socket. While leveling our glyphs, we are prioritizing whatever glyphs will give us the most power as we level up. Let's take a look at the final setup first so we can see the endgame strategy, then discuss how we should prioritize them as we level. For our first socket, we'll be running the Elementalist glyph, mainly for this 15% equation multiplier on the bonus since we are using a build with all 3 elements. I also wanted to experiment what leveling with Elementalist felt like versus leveling with Enchanter first here, and I do not recommend it. At level 15, we're missing out on an extra 50% non-physical damage, which was very noticeable for me. This 15% equation multiplier won't overtake that bonus in total damage until we are closer to endgame and have larger numbers in the different groups of our damage equation. Remember that with the way math works, these equation multipliers will become much more valuable the larger the numbers are in our other groups. For example, if your damage modifier bonuses equal a total of 300%, a bonus multiplier of 10% will give you a 30 percentage point increase. Whereas if the bonuses from these groups equal 1000% total, this same 10% multiplier will now give you a 100 percentage point increase instead of 30. Additionally, every bonus multiplier you add to the equation not only multiplies against your other groups, but also multiplies against the other multipliers. And so the more of these you can stack, the more valuable they become. For this reason, we're actually going to level the Adept glyph here first, then switch it over to Elementalist later, which we will cover in a minute. Once Elementalist is here, we only need 40 int to bring the bonus online. For our second and third socket, we are running Exploit and Control to leverage the 39 decks available in these 2 boards. These not only scale their raw bonus with decks, but also give us 2 additional equation multipliers to add to our stack. Exploit will give us more vulnerability damage, and Control will give us significantly more damage to crowd control targets. And we have everything crowd controlled the majority of the time between our Nova Freeze, Meteor Immobilize, and Raymond Teleport Stun. In our Frigid Fate board, we are running Adept to leverage the 70 int available, which will give us a fat damage bonus on our Meteor along with significantly larger area of effect for it to hit. In our Burning Instinct board, we are running our most valuable deck scaling glyph, which is Destruction, to leverage this 49 decks available around it. This not only gives us a giant amount of additional crit damage scaling, but also adds another bonus equation multiplier to our stack. Finally, in our last board, we are just grabbing 25 willpower in order to bring this damage reduction bonus for the Warding Glyph online. The thought process here is this will give us close to the 25% damage reduction right when we need it after our Meteor dump, as our freeze is ending and we're starting to kite backward because we will be out of mana. You can experiment with different glyphs here, as I'm really not sure whether this damage reduction or more damage with another equation multiplier will be most valuable at level 100. If your survivability is already good, then it could be worth trying Flame Feeder here and rearranging it to scoop some decks, as this will give us a significant damage bonus when stuff is burning after our first meteor hits, as well as another 10% equation multiplier for direct damage against burning targets that we can add to our stack. So in summary, for the final setup, we are running Elementalist in our starting board, Exploit in the Enchanter board, Control in the Searing Heat board, Adept in the Frigid Fate board, Destruction in the Burning Instinct board, and finally, Warding in the Static Surge board. Now let's take a look at our glyph priority for leveling up. I recommend starting this very first socket with Adept and grabbing the 40 int right away to bring this increased area of effect bonus online for your meteor. Next, we'll be using Exploit in our Enchanter board because our vuln damage will likely be very low at this stage of the game. For our third socket, we are going to use Destruction, as this is the phase where our crit damage begins to become very valuable. Next, as we move down here to the Frigid Fate board, we'll want to use Control fourth and actually scoop as much of the decks we can within range instead of this int. And then later, once we switch it back to Adept, we can rearrange the surrounding nodes to prioritize int. Fifth, for the Burning Instinct board, we can start to level Elementalist. And again, instead of grabbing all this decks right away, you'll want to try to grab 40 surrounding int to bring the 15% additional bonus online, and then rearrange the surrounding nodes to look like this with all the decks once you've switched it out for Destruction. Finally, for the last glyph, we are taking Warding primarily for the damage reduction, and we'll also get a nice little bonus to stunned enemies from this Incapacitate rare node getting increased. Now that we understand the order, I highly recommend leveling all these glyphs to 15 first, then following the same order to get to 21. The only exception may be to wait on leveling the Warding glyph at all until your other glyphs are close to 21 or you are getting close to this final socket on your last board. So in summary, for leveling, we are running Adept in our first socket optimized for int, Exploit in our second socket optimized for dex, Destruction in our third socket optimized for dex, Control in our fourth socket optimized for dex, Elementalist in our fifth socket optimized for int, and Warding in our final socket optimized for will. Once your glyphs start to hit level 15 and gain their second range and you're getting into your final boards, you'll want to begin rearranging the glyphs to look like they do in this final setup in order to take full advantage of the attribute scaling available on each board. So one last time, looking at the rearranged final setup once everything is leveled, we'll be switching Elementalist to our starting board, Exploit still in the Enchanter board, Control to the Searing Heat board, Adept to the Frigid Fate board, Destruction to the Burning Instinct board, and finally Warding in the Static Surge board. I hope that made sense. I know this can all be a bit confusing, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Otherwise, you can try to catch me live on my stream if you want a quicker answer. Alright, moving on to gear, aspects, and hearts. Just so you know the seasonal stuff up front, we are running Barber, Revenge, and Spellbreaking for our hearts, and I have 2 more rings with Talrasha and Bakana that I hot swap, but we will talk more about all of that in a minute. First, I think it's important to have a general idea of what stats we are trying to prioritize, so let's take a look at our basic stat priority first. Then we'll take a closer look at each individual piece of gear for the specific aspects and affixes on that slot. The gear I'm showing here is exactly what I used in all these clips, and you'll see that some of it is not super optimized. I've been experimenting with a bunch of different stuff for this build and have not obtained the specific rolls I need yet, mainly max health, for many of my items to be best in slot. The good news is that if the build is this powerful with this gear, it will be significantly more powerful if you can obtain BIS rolls. For offensive stats, we really want to prioritize crit chance, crit damage, and vulnerability damage wherever we can get it. These only have a chance to roll on our rings and weapons with the exception of crit chance on gloves, so it's really important to try to scoop as many of those affixes wherever possible for those slots. Next, on our weapon and all of our other gear, intelligence is always a solid choice as this gives us direct damage scaling with our skills and has its own group in the damage equation, so it gets multiplied by all our other groups. One of the most important things we'll want to keep an eye out for with this build is pants with a +3 meteor rank that we can upgrade to +4, and an amulet with a +2 mastery skills that we can upgrade to +3, which combined will give us our giant rank 12 meteor. Ideally, you'll also want to have plus ranks to the Conjuration Mastery passive or the Devouring Blaze passive on the same amulet. For defensive stats, max health and damage reduction seem by far the most valuable for our survivability. I really try to pick these up anywhere I can. I haven't had great luck on finding max health rolls on gear with the other fixes I need this time around, so I'm actually running with basically no max health rolls, putting me at only 6,000 HP. If you can find max health with other good rolls, it will substantially boost your survivability. For utility, movement speed on boots and amulet is always high priority, especially with this build where we don't have a true dodge, so trying to sidestep enemy damage is quite important. It's also crucial to find boots with the primary affix attacks reduce dodge cooldown, as this is what really leverages our attack speed to reset our dodge teleport. You may be tempted to run the multiple dodges affix here instead, but having tested all 3 primary affixes quite a bit, I promise you the attack CDR feels much better. Additionally, we never really need to use the teleports back to back since we are also running the actual teleport spell as an ability on our hotbar, so there's really not a need to have multiple charges if we can get more total teleports from the CDR roll. Since we're building heavily into attack speed with Spark, with Essu's procs giving us 50% more and the Lightning ult giving us another 25% on top of that, the attack CDR affix synergizes perfectly with this build. If you find good boots with the dodge roll instead of CDR, they can definitely still work. I just hope you will get to try out the attack CDR at some point because it really feels great with this build. Okay, now let's take a look at each individual gear slot and their aspect, starting with Helm, which will be the aspect of Might. Note that the Helm and Legs aspect can be swapped as they work in both slots. Aspect of Might will give us a nice 20% damage reduction boost for up to 6 seconds after our basic attack, and since we are basic attacking a lot with Spark in this build, it will be up pretty much all the time. For affixes, we'll want to prioritize Ranks of Hydra and basic skill attack speed first. These are quite important rolls with this build and should take priority over all the other affixes. Max Life and Intelligence are next, followed by Life on Kill or plus ranks to Lightning Spear. Note that for these lower priority rolls like Life on Kill, if you need a bit of extra stats to bring a Paragon bonus online, such as extra dexterity to activate your 10% vulnerability bonus on the Frigid Fate board, I think that is worth building as well. For chest armor, we really want the unique item Raiment of the Infinite. This is the only unique we are running with this build, but it's fairly critical to how the build works, as it turns our teleport from a defensive spell into an offensive spell, and lets us clump everything together and stun it to set up our giant meteor burst. If you don't have Raiment yet, don't worry, it will come, but in the meantime you should prioritize max life, damage reduction, intelligence, and damage rolls on chest. For gloves, we are running Aspect of Ancient Flame, and note that this is an offensive aspect that can be swapped with Serpentine aspect on our ring if needed. Aspect of Ancient Flame is what gives Essu's Ferocity proc the attack speed bonus, and is fairly crucial for making this build work. With how often we are critting, this will be procced a large majority of the time. For affixes, I really like to prioritize Lucky Hit Restore Primary Resource on gloves, as this always seems to help with mana quite a bit in any build. Attack speed will be prioritized next to stack with our Essu's proc and Lightning ult, followed by crit chance. There's a couple decent options for the final roll, but I like Lucky Hit Chance to heal just to increase our survivability a bit more. Intelligence and Lightning Critical Strike damage are also great options. For pants, we are running Aspect of Disobedience, which will give us some nice extra damage mitigation from the increased armor and will stack very quickly with our attack speed. From just looking at my armor tooltip while this is fully stacked, it gives around 20% increased damage reduction against physical, so half as much against spells. For affixes, plus 3 ranks of Meteor is our main priority. You should sacrifice all other affixes just to get the Meteor ranks if that's what it takes and you haven't found something better yet. Once upgraded, this will give your Meteor 4 additional ranks, which will increase the base weapon damage scaling by 32%. Next in priority are max life and damage reduction, followed by intelligence. For our boots, we are running Exploiter's Aspect, which will give us 20% increased duration on our Raiment Stun, Nova Freeze, and Meteor Immobilize. Also, when elites are unstoppable or we're fighting bosses, we'll get the additional 40% increased damage. For boot affixes, like we talked about earlier, the main thing we really need to make this build work is the primary affix, Attacks Reduce Dodge Cooldown. In my opinion, this should take priority over all other affixes. Move speed is top priority for the secondary affixes, followed closely by ranks of Frost Nova. Remember that ranks of teleport are not quite as valuable with this build since they don't seem to affect our dodge teleport, but certainly won't hurt since it will still reduce the cooldown of your primary teleport. After Frost Nova, Intelligence is next in priority, followed by several good choices for the last slot, including mana cost reduction, dodge chance, or any primary stat you need to bring your Paragon bonuses online. On our staff, we are running Aspect of 3 Curses. With the 100% increase we get from applying it to a two-hander, this becomes an 80% crit damage bonus to Meteor active all the time. And when targets are healthy, it gets doubled to 160%. And with the way the Barber interacts with our Meteor Burst window, we'll actually get the majority of our Meteors to hit healthy targets because they are immune before they pop, so this 160% bonus will be active for our Meteors very often. For affixes, we'll want to prioritize crit damage, vuln damage, intelligence, and damage to crowd controlled. Our amulet is perhaps one of the most important pieces of gear for this build, and potentially one of the most difficult to find the right rolls on, because we are looking for something very specific. Ranks of mastery skills combined with ranks of the Conjuration Mastery passive or the Devouring Blaze passive. If you find any of these rolls with a couple other good affixes, it can certainly be worth trying to re-roll one of the weaker slots to get the other main one you need, and this is how I got the amulet I'm wearing in this video. Conjuration Mastery and Devouring Blaze are very close in viability with this build, and I'd say get whatever one you can get with the Mastery skills roll. Elemental Dominance or Hoarfrost can also work. The difference is that Conjuration Mastery will give you an extra 6% multiplier to all damage you deal when you have both your Hydras up, and will give you up to another 24% increase when you Lightning Ult and get a bunch of Lightning Spear procs. Devouring Blaze will give you an extra 30% crit damage on your follow-up meteors after you drop the first one, since everything hit will be immobilized and burning. I personally favor the Conjuration Mastery passive slightly more, just because I like having a reliable 12% damage multiplier on all my damage all the time when I have my Hydras up. Getting this stack of mastery skills with a good passive takes priority above all the other rolls, but if possible, try to grab some extra movement speed and damage reduction along with them. We'll be running Aspect of Control to get the 50% amulet bonus on the immobilized, stunned, or frozen damage multiplier. Our CC with this build hits all three of these criteria. Our Raiment Teleport stuns, our Nova freezes, and our Meteor immobilizes, so we will have very high uptime on this aspect. On our rings, we'll be running Aspect of the Umbral and Serpentine aspect. Umbral is our primary method to regenerate mana, and it gives us lots of mana quickly right when we need it to drop a few more meteors in our burst window. Serpentine aspect will allow us to summon a second Hydra, and they will now last up to 24% longer with the recent patch changes. Remember, this one can be swapped to gloves if needed. For the affixes on both rings, we'll be prioritizing crit chance, crit damage, and vulnerability damage first, as these are the main slots where we can acquire these high value damage rolls. If you can find those affixes with max health, you've got yourself Abyss Ring. One unfortunate thing for this season is you can't change the color of the heart slots you get on jewelry, so if you get Abyss Ring roll with a pink socket, it's a bit sad. You may have to juggle your hearts around a bit and drop the barber in one if you get really good affixes but the wrong color roll. It's kind of lame in my opinion that we can't re-roll these colors for material costs like we can with a bunch of other stuff. It would really make obtaining Abyss jewelry for the season much more reasonable. Alright, that leads us into seasonal hearts. The barber strangely seems like the best Wrathful heart by far right now for most builds. And it's a bit unfortunate because I feel like the gameplay design on it is pretty bad and not well thought out. Doing damage to an immune target where I get no damage feedback and then it suddenly explodes sometime later is not satisfying in my opinion. In fact, it makes the game feel kind of buggy or laggy. Big damage number feedback is part of what makes combat in these types of games so satisfying, and the gameplay design on this could have been much better while accomplishing a similar mechanic. It is undeniably strong though, as I went for a while without running it because I'm stubborn, and when I finally slotted it in, it really did make a big difference, especially with the way we're lining up all of our DPS in a few second window to crush everything with meteors. We'll be running 2 blue or brutal hearts for our other slots, grabbing Revenge and Spellbreaking simply for how powerful and important the damage reduction is for our class. Revenge will suppress 20% of damage up front, and Spellbreaking got way better with this last patch and now gives a ton of flat damage reduction instead of elemental resistance, and it gets triggered quite often. I really wanted to run Talrasha and Pakana and actually was for quite a while, but switching to these 2 defensive hearts made a huge difference for my survivability in Nightmare dungeons. I still use Talrasha and Pakana when I'm fighting stuff closer to my level, and so if you want, you can do what I do and find 2 more rings with orange sockets instead of blue ones, and slot in Talrasha and Pakana with the same aspects so you can quick swap to them when you want to blast harder and don't need as much damage reduction. Another cool thing you could do here to mix it up on your offensive rings is swap Umbral or Serpentine aspect for the aspect of Shattered Stars to give your meteor some meteorites. I really wanted to run this aspect, and I did for a long time because it's really cool, but we are just 1 slot short for offensive aspects, and so I had to choose one to give up, and this was it. If you really like this aspect, you could put it on one of your offensive rings instead of Umbral or Serpentine. For our other gems that aren't hearts, we'll be running rubies in all of our gear for the increase to max health, and sapphire in our weapon because we have much more crowd control uptime than we do vulnerability uptime with this build. Double Topaz in our staff is a fun one to mess around with because of how much we are basic attacking with Spark in this build, but it's really hard to give up the extra 24% crit damage that Sapphire gives our Meteor Burst. Boom, we did it! Man, these take me forever. I hope all that made sense, and I hope you find it valuable. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I've spent basically the whole season so far crafting this build, and it's evolved many times, and it's finally arrived in its final form and in a place where I feel really good about sharing it. Honestly, it's a super fun build that feels quite a bit different than the other builds I've tried in this game, and Meteor really just hits different. Next, I'll be diving into testing some other unique build ideas for the season, as well as creating videos on other games I enjoy with wizards or sorcerers like Baldur's Gate 3. I'll still be trying to stream a bit, especially when I'm testing new stuff for Diablo, as I actually get a lot of really cool feedback and ideas from all of you. So if you can catch me live on Twitch at Zikorik with a 0, I'd love to hang out for a bit. And again, a big shout out to the homies who have been hanging out and theory crafting with me. All right, that's all I got. Hope it was good. Hope you end up giving this build a try at some point. Other than that, take care, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.